Welcome to Liticast. I'm John Robinson, VP of Growth here at Litify. We're joined today by a fellow Wolverine alumni. We both went to University of Michigan
Go Blue.
back in the early 2000s. Go Blue. Gyi Tsakalakis. We practiced that, right? I did it right this time.
Nailed it.
All right. Like the butter.
Just like the butter.
Welcome to those of you who are watching us live. Right now, we're live on Facebook Live. We're live on YouTube Live. We're live on LinkedIn Live. We're also live on the Liticast website, litify.com/Liticast, where you can catch all of our previous episodes as well. Carolyn, our content strategist, does a great job at putting together recaps of previous episodes. And if you're watching this recorded, you can read a recap there as well. So, Gyi, you are the co-founder of AttorneySync, a digital legal marketing agency for our guests who don't know who you are. Non-practicing lawyer. He's familiar with the unique considerations of ethically and effectively marketing a law practice online. He's also a legal marketing technology advisor, president of EPL Digital, a digital marketing intelligence and analytics company, and proud to say a fellow Wolverine alumni. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm fired up to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we met each other about a month ago. We've had some great engaging conversations offline. I'm really excited for the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We're going to get deep. We're going to get tactical. We're going to talk attribution and how you can find out the attribution from your marketing efforts, regardless of where those marketing efforts are coming from. We were even coming up with like a buzzy topic that we can name this, and we're using some consonants: clicks, calls, content, getting full funnel attribution. So this is going to be interesting. When we were preparing for this yesterday, I think we got into an interesting conversation that I want to continue today, which was, at the end of the day, we're really not talking about marketing. We're really talking about how do you improve a business? How do you track what's working for your business, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing is it's none of this stuff has any meaning unless you can tie it to some kind of business metric, right? Otherwise, it's we were talking about the other day, and we hear this all the time where it's like you got all these vanity metrics or indirect metrics, which I think that some of that has its place, but at the end of the day, you got to really understand your business and then connect it back to the time and money that you're spending to drive that business metric.
Yep, absolutely. I'd love it if those who are watching live, please tell us, where you're watching us from. Ask any questions that you want. We will try to get to as many as we can. We have a framework for this conversation, but we want it to go wherever our audience wants it to go and provide as much value as possible. So please post in the comments on whatever channel you're watching. We have them right up here on the right side of our screen. So we'll try and engage with you guys as much as we possibly can in real time. So let's dive a little bit more into the why, right? Why are we even having this conversation today? Why do we care about attribution?
Yeah, my big thing is that the marketplace of marketing ideas and tools and vendors and all that jazz tends to seem to focus on the wrong kind of end of it. And again, like I said, it's if you're going to use Pareto principle 80-20, I think that the conversations tend to be right now like 80% too much on these indirect metrics, 20% on the business metrics. And so I think part of our mission today is to try to flip that on its head and say, look, some of these other metrics matter. They do. Like, it's not to say that, and we'll talk SEO, links matter, but if you can't do proper attribution to people searching on Google back to whether it's your Google My Business listing or your website, calling you, live chat, however they're going to convert, and then turning into a new client for you, or at least an open file. I think we get lost in all of the noise of marketing shininess, and so that's what we're here. That's the why to me is like it's only your time and money is only well invested if it's can be tied back to growing your firm or whatever your marketing objective that you're trying to achieve that relates to your business.
Sure, right. The story, and we've heard it time and time again. How do I generate more cases? And I think that conversation starts with understanding what are you actually doing? What's working, right? Do we need to try something new? Do we need to remove something that isn't working? Do we need to amplify something that is working? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And this, to me, the starting point for that conversation, it's kind of back to this idea of, it's a marketing 101 type of concept that people have been thinking about this since time out of mind, but is understanding who your target audience is, and how they do research, how they look for lawyers, and even folks that are doing brand building. There's all sorts of ways you can measure the impact of your brand build, right? So whether it's through market research or Search Console data, how many times people are searching on your name or firm name, it's really about tying some kind of accountability back to your marketing from a business standpoint.
Right. The end goal is you want to find someone else that your law firm can help. How do you generate a new client, right? Your marketing efforts are at the other end of this conversation, right? You're starting with the marketing, you're ending with a signed client, and that gap in the middle is this funnel that we're going to talk about today. And how do you get there? How do you know from the 10 different things that you're doing from a marketing standpoint? And we're going to go through a lot of these today. We're going to talk content. We're going to talk phone calls. We're going to talk search, paid, branding. How do you actually track back the case that you signed? Where did that come from? Right? It's not a simple conversation. So those of you watching, do not expect to walk away with, I just have to flip this switch or buy this piece of software or hire this agency and I'm going to get the answer immediately. There are things that need to be put in place that allow you to actually track what's happening along the way, so that when you do finally sign that client, you're able to identify what happened along the way. And there's a lot of different touch points, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point is, my goal today is not to just say, here's a software, go implement this. It's really more conceptually thinking about the dots that need to be connected to be able to close the loop. And so there's a lot of roads to Rome. There's a lot of different software and a lot of different tools that can help you implement this system. But I want folks to walk away from this saying, this can be done. And so that they can go back and say, this is, it's not a magic. This marketing is not magic. It's certainly some art, but it's also a lot of science. And so hopefully people will come away with at least a couple ideas of how to start to move in the direction of being able to close that loop.
Yep. So one of the things that you brought up yesterday, and before we dive into these specific channels, I want to make sure that we talk about this point. You had said that you talk to a lot of managing partners, and the answer or the feedback that you get is, well, sometimes it takes me 3 years to generate a settlement on a case, right? How do I know the marketing that I'm running today is actually effective? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that everybody kind of looks at the holy grail, for lack of a better term, in terms of return on investment, return on ad spend, right? So how much more money are you making based on the time and money that you're spending to generate fees? And, if you're in a practice, if you're a plaintiff's firm, sometimes it can, you're at a trial, it could take 3 years to a settlement, whatever it is. And so you kind of got to work your way back from that, right? So I think eventually all of your marketing should be accountable at some point for return on investment. But I think it's a little bit too myopic to just say, well, we're just going to run something for 4 years and then start calculating return on investment. So a couple other metrics to be thinking about, right? Certainly target cost per acquisition for in open file, right? So whether you call it a packet or a retainer or whatever it's going to be, most of the time, if you get to the stage where you're having a client sign a retainer, they're qualified, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be even sending them a retainer. And so over time, most people know over time the value of their clients. Hopefully, you have some general sense of it. And again, even that part, like we could talk about like figuring out lifetime value of clients and all that kind of stuff. But even simplistically, just saying, look, I know on average, we're going to have some big cases, we're going to have some small cases, we're going to have some base hits. But I know that if I'm spending less than X to acquire those retainers, then I know that this is going to be a good investment over the long run. That's just one idea.
Right. So if a signed case winds up generating revenue for your firm at a certain rate, then you can interpolate that that a signed case is worth a certain amount of money, right? And maybe a signed case takes you 2 months from the time that you generate a lead until the time the packet goes out and the packet comes back signed. Maybe 2 months isn't short enough for you. You need to make decisions quicker than that. So let's go one step up the funnel, right? Just qualifying that case and sending that packet out. It means that your marketing really did its job, correct? Right? It generated interest. It drove the inquiry. The inquiry was real. It was qualified enough to be screened, pass an intake, and get a packet out. And I think that's probably, if you're looking at, what's the earliest stage that I can determine whether or not any marketing effort is working? It's that packet out, right? That qualification.
Yeah, I think that's right. We usually live in the world of either qualified inquiries. So, however you're going to mark an inquiry qualified, because we could argue that if someone raises their hand and says, "Hey, I'm interested in your services," that switches to a sales function, right? So now you got to get on the phone and actually, have a conversation with the prospect or the potential client, and articulate why you're the right lawyer for them. But ultimately, you're going to live in that world of qualified potential client inquiries or retainers. I mean, those are the two that I think 80% of lawyers should be focused on from a business standpoint. And as we're talking, because if you keep going up, right, if you keep going further and further away from those, you start getting into things like, one that we talk about all the time in internet marketing is traffic. But traffic doesn't have value unless it turns into something, right? You can have traffic, you can write a blog post or create a page on your site. We'll talk, if I put a page on my site that's about the Michigan Wolverines and I generate a bunch of traffic from that, but my clients are lawyers. Maybe I get some lawyers in there, but it's not very targeted. So I can have all sorts of visits for that and very few phone calls or inquiries about my business. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is you can't, as you move further and further away from those qualified prospects, you start to get into these more indirect metrics.
So we've got a few different conversion rates that we're looking at here, right? We've got, and I'm going to work backwards. We've got a retained client to a settlement. So we should know, your firm should know approximately how many times or what the percentage rate is of a retained client to a settlement. We've got a signed, or working backwards here, we've got a signed client from a packet out. You should know what percentage you've got there. And then we have that packet out would be that qualified lead, right? And one level up is that actual inquiry. So going from top of the funnel down, you've got the lead to qualified lead or packet out, that packet out to signed client, and then that signed client to revenue for the firm. We're going to talk about these different channels, but it's really important that at its core, if you don't have that information, right, channel agnostic, you need to know those three data points, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, you never get to return on investment analysis. You never get to target cost per acquisition analysis without those pieces.
I've seen, and we can go on about the topic of optimizing and increasing those conversion rates at various levels, but I've seen the greatest increase from talking about a turnkey solution, right? Just adding on something like e-signatures, right? I've seen contract out rates go from 25 or 30% up to 60, 65, 70%, depending on the different vertical or case type. So if you're looking at, if you do know what that data point is and you're looking at making that a little bit tighter within your firm, look at implementing something like e-signatures. Another thing I've seen work very, very well. Again, we're talking about taking that qualified lead and actually turning it into a signed client. I would look at like follow-up automation, whether that's done through email or omni-channel, right? Text message follow-up, phone call follow-up, making sure that the practice management solution that you're utilizing actually has a way of identifying how long it has been since a contract has gone out. Has that contract actually come back? What's the next touch point that should happen, whether it's manual or automated? So again, could definitely talk about that for a while, but I saw that as low-hanging fruit there that we definitely should bring up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you, and I'm sure you've seen this too, how many times we look at like a media buy and we're looking at call detail reports and there's missed phone calls in there and there are, you talk to the lawyer will say, oh, well, if they really want to get a hold of me, they'll leave me a voice message. And like, that's just not the consumer's expectation anymore. And the more that you reduce the friction through that process, the higher your conversion rates are. The more that you make it easier for them to get to retainer, not surprisingly, the higher your conversion rates are. So it's really it's funny because it's some respects it's a service aspect. Like you want to be thinking about the same way that you're delivering great service to your clients. That needs to start from their first impression of you, whether that's how you do the intake, how you do follow up, how you nurture that lead. Makes a huge difference. And so it's a great opportunity because a lot of times, especially if as you mentioned, if you implement some kind of automation, you don't have to pump more money into your marketing system. You're just getting more out of what you're already doing.
Right. And sometimes certain marketing efforts, depending on the medium by which they generate the intake, right, a call or a form may be deemed not effective. And really, it's not the marketing that's not effective. It's actually the follow-up and the qualification process that's not effective, right?
Exactly.
Moving even up the chain further, speed to lead, right? How quickly you call that lead if it's a form. You talked about answering the phone if it was an inbound phone call. So a lot of ways to optimize within the funnel. But what we're here to talk about today is actually how you can tell what channel is actually driving revenue, and at whatever point within that funnel you're able to track appropriately, knowing what that lead or qualified lead or signed client traces back to. So let's start going through this list. I think for definitely for personal injury plaintiffs' attorneys, phone calls are huge, right? You see it on the billboards, direct response TV ads, pay-per-click. Everybody's driving phone calls, and ideally, that's what you want because you've already got the person engaged, and there's no form inquiry and having to get them on the phone opportunity for attrition. So how do you track inbound phone calls?
Great question. So the buzzword here, the technology buzzword that you can go search after this is dynamic number insertion, but it's essentially call tracking numbers. And ideally, you're using something that does call tracking numbers from a pool of numbers on a session basis. So what the less jargony way of saying that is, someone comes to your website, whether they come from Google or Facebook or your email signature, they land on your website, and the software, whether it's CallRail, call tracking metrics, there's a lot of different software that does this, Invoca, will generate a specific tracking number for that session out of a pool of numbers. And they marry that data with your Google Analytics data. So when the potential client calls, it's just like in analytics, you'll see an event, phone call, the source that they came from, the medium they came from, the landing page that they made the call from. And so to me, that's kind of table stakes. In my opinion, and we have these discussions all the time about call tracking versus vanity numbers and branded numbers. And I think both have a place. But to me, the value in being able to measure this data on your website, keyword level dynamic number insertion on your site for tracking, because it's just, you get so granular with it, especially for paid search. You really need that in order to be able to test ad copy, test landing page creative, and see what's performing better in terms of generating a call and increase those conversion rates that you were talking about. Yeah.
And there's some, we're talking about this at a surface level, but you can go very, very deep. So in the same way that you can track a web visitor, as you said, in Google Analytics, you could tell what pages people visited. You can tell what source they came from, whether it was paid or it was not paid. Specifically, you mentioned which keyword they came from. You can tell which ad they clicked on. It's a very, very interesting way for you to take data that exists online and bring it offline. And this dynamic phone number insertion technology is relatively new in the past 4 or 5 years. But how this actually works, right? You talk about this session and this pool. Think of it as when you go to a website and I go to a website, we both go to the same website, we both see a different phone number. So what's happening in these softwares is the solution is assigning a phone number to you and it's assigning a phone number to me. And for a certain period of time, no one else on the internet is going to get served that specific phone number. The software, the solution itself, actually is the one changing the phone number on the web page. So it's able to identify the same information that a Google Analytics is able to identify. It stores that information within the software. When a phone call is actually initiated, what happens is that online data is then sent in parallel to the phone call. So think about it as there's parallel paths that are happening. The phone call works the same way a phone call always works. I pick up the phone, I call, the call center answers the call. But now what you've done is you've created a data path that runs in parallel to that voice phone call, and all that information from that website visit, that specific user who called that phone number, is sent into your practice management platform, so that you can now marry that phone call with that data from the website visit, right?
Yeah, and that's like such a key dot to connect. Like you said, if 80% of your potential clients are converting through phone, and the best that you have is, how did you hear about us? You're going to get the answers of, oh, the internet, right? That's helpful. Or oh, a friend of mine, but you're going to be able to see now. You're going to be able to distinguish between paid search campaign, organic, Facebook campaigns, paid social campaigns, email marketing. And I think a lot of lawyers are familiar, especially that have done offline for years. And as you mentioned, direct response, whether it's TV or billboard. In addition to brand building, no question that brand building has its place. But that's the thing too, is there's even ways to do. It's not quite as tight, but you can even do attribution from your brand building campaigns, right? You can see the impact of TV media buys on the incremental lift on search. So you can see when someone's watching TV, most people are sitting there with their phone, they look you up online because they saw that ad, and are doing searches on your name, and you can monitor that stuff too.
Right. You're talking about TV, right? With phone calls, you're in an interesting situation because you can't, even if you are using one of these sophisticated platforms, you can't assign a unique phone number, right? So at that point, you have to make the decision of how are you going to track the phone calls that are coming from your TV ads. And the easiest thing to do here, and this is technology that's been around for a long time, it's not even really technology, it's just you're making the deliberate decision of this specific ad is going to have this specific phone number. And you can use these tools, right? CallRail, Invoca, call tracking metrics, to generate a unique phone number, right within the software. And you're going to say this 888 number is connected to this specific TV ad. And then if they're calling that number, it was driven from that TV ad. And you can even go one level deeper than that and say, well, I'm showing this ad on A&E and I'm showing this ad on Bravo, and it's the same ad, but I'm going to show everything's going to be the same except for the phone number. And you can go one level deeper than that and say on certain day parts, I want this ad on this channel to have this specific phone number on midnights where I'm buying remnant, and this number when I'm buying primetime. And that same data flows in the same way into whatever software you're using to track your intakes. Some solutions are easier to integrate than others, right? These parallel paths that we're talking about, connecting to your phone system, very easy. It's just a forwarding number, but actually that data path, right? You want that data path to go where the intake is going to be worked, so that when that intake turns into a matter, and that matter winds up getting signed and becoming revenue for your firm, you now can trace it all the way back. And that's that full funnel that we're talking about.
Close the loop.
So let's talk about TV, right? How can you tell if you're running TV ads and the TV ads aren't necessarily directly driving a phone call like we just spoke about? How can you tell if those TV ads are working?
So the simple version of this is you establish a baseline for traffic and conversions to your website, or use it. You could even use a dedicated URL if you wanted, so that it's a URL. It'd be the same thing. It's like a call tracking number is on your creative on TV. You could use a dedicated URL in your creative on TV, and then the only people who are seeing this are people who see this ad. That's one way to do it. But you can even do it with your own website if you have enough data and you have a sufficient baseline. So you have that baseline number, and then you cross-reference your call data and your analytics data with when you were running those ads. So you'll see, and that's where I was kind of flippantly said before about the incremental lift from TV, but you have a good sense, with some math, you have a good sense that that TV creative and those TV media buys, they're driving people to the website during those times. And then you can still, once they get to the website, you're back in business because now you can also track the calls that come in. So that's another, it's not a one-to-one. People always want to hold my feet to the fire about that. And there is you have to have a statistically significant amount of data to actually do this. I think data scarcity is a big issue for especially like smaller firms that aren't really heavily invested in their advertising. But if you have sufficient data, you can see the impact of your TV, even if it's not direct response from a call from the actual ad. You can see the impact on your traffic and the phone calls that are coming in during those times that you're running those ads.
Yep, absolutely. All comes back to data, right? You have to have enough of it. You have to know how to develop insights from it. Even something as simple as opening up your Google Analytics and looking at your traffic by hour of day. If you know you had a media buy at a certain time, you see a spike in direct traffic, right? Or branded traffic, branded search traffic. You know that there's something that's driving that. People aren't just spontaneously at 7:52 p.m. All of a sudden searching for Litify or searching for AttorneySync, right? Something is driving that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's another really good point, especially if you have a more sophisticated or complicated, advertising campaign. Make sure the left hand's talking to the right hand. We've seen sometimes where a firm will be running TV, but then people at the firm are also have a bunch of other marketing campaigns going on, whether it's, maybe it's a in-person seminar or a speaking engagement. And so it's really important that you understand a holistic view of what you're doing. Otherwise, you'll have these problems of misattribution where, I'm just going to make one up, but like you're doing a speaking event in front of 1,000 people, and you're also running TV creative at the same time, and you see those spikes happen at the same time. Now you've got an issue, right? Was it because I was speaking and everybody's looking me up online, or was it because of my TV ad?
Right. Quick pause here for a moment. Want to invite everyone who's watching us live, please ask any questions you have for Gyi, for myself. We're going to be going through, we've got a few more channels here to talk about and how you can track attribution back to these marketing channels. But if you have specific questions, we are happy to answer them. So post them in the comments, those of you watching on LinkedIn, YouTube Live, or Facebook Live. Let's talk about blogging. This was an interesting one when we were preparing for this. We hear about that blogging has become a buzzword, right? It's, I need to blog, I need to have a blog. But does a blog actually generate intakes for your firm? How can you tell?
Right. And I think there's, I'm going to think about this through two big lenses, right? So, one reason you might blog is to build an audience, right? So get awareness for you as an expert in your field, so that people that are just subscribed to your blog are following you, you're staying top of mind. That's in that branding bucket. But there's another bucket, which we'll call it the unbranded bucket for now. Maybe you write on some legislative update. Maybe you write on a specific high profile case. Maybe you're writing on a specific phase of litigation, or maybe you're just including some kind of, you're answering some kind of regular question that you hear all the time from clients and potential clients. So when those blog posts get scooped up by Google, they get indexed and start showing up in search results, we're back to, you can track that people came to those posts. And now once they're on your site, in a combination of whether it's dynamic dynamic number insertion, measuring calls that come from specific posts, or people fill out a form, right? So it's the same type of thing in Google Analytics, you can create goal conversions based on people filling out a form on a specific page, or a phone call, or a live chat request. But now you've got tight attribution between someone doing a search, coming to that specific blog post, and making a phone call or filling out a form. Put that into your CRM system, and now you've connected your blogging activities all the way down to qualified prospect and ideally retainer.
Those of you who are watching who are Litify customers, I know that there are some, that last step that you just talked about, right? Putting that in your CRM, right? Getting that there at scale is a challenge unless you've actually made that connection from that form into your CRM. A lot of times you see form submissions get emailed to the intake departments to answer those intakes, or maybe the form contact information gets put in a practice management platform. so that the intake call center can give them a call. But getting that data out of Google Analytics becomes the challenge, right? I have some thoughts on how you can accomplish this. With Litify, you can use a tool like GA Connector, which is the Google Analytics connector, relatively inexpensive, and it's essentially taking the data that Google Analytics is collecting anonymously. For those of you who dive deep into analytics, you know that you can't really tell who specifically is being represented by any of their data points. They anonymize everything. What GA Connector does is it takes the variables that Google Analytics collects and it holds them, and it gives you a unique ID that you pass through with your form submission. So you pass that into Litify, and then the GA connector goes into Google Analytics and it says, grab all this information that you have. The browser, I want the pages they visited, I want the referring source, any of the variables that were passed in the URL, grab it and store it on this intake record. And that's it. And now you have it. And it's every form submission, and it's automatic, and there's no loss. There's no gaps in data at all. Just every time a form submits, it comes in. But for those who are not using Litify, what are some of the suggestions that you have on how to actually get that data out of the form submission, out of Google Analytics, and look at it outside of analytics?
Yeah, and a lot of it really comes down to the CRM that you choose, because when we say CRM, we're talking about either client relationship management tool or customer relationship management tool. But if you don't have that, it's going to be really tough. And so to me, it's just about finding a CRM that integrates well with Google Analytics data. Sure, you can pass hidden fields through forms, campaign-based, but if you really want to do what you just described, you need some tool that does that, because that's the missing piece that we see so often. We'll talk about, we can report on phone calls, we can report on form fills, we can report on events in Google Analytics and goal conversions in Google Analytics. But if you really want to take it that last mile, you have to be able to connect that analytics data into a CRM or practice management tool. And so it's really about finding a CRM that can do that. Otherwise, you've got some coding to do, or you got to hire a coder that can do what you just described GA Connector doing, right? Because it's just code. You can write a script that does that same thing and then pushes it into your CRM. So as long as CRM can take those kind of hidden fields and variables through the form or through your call data, you can do it. A lot of them can do it. But as sophisticated as what you just described, you've really got to have something that's designed to capture all that and create that ID, that unique ID that can pass the data from analytics into your CRM tool. That's the key piece that so many firms seem to miss.
And maybe I made it sound complicated because the process in the background is complicated, but the reality is that if you have the right technology that talks to each other, the technology is doing that hard work for you, right? Really, you're just saying, this is my analytics account, this is my form, and this is my CRM, and go. And, it's a few minutes worth of setup and the data just flows.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, really with this conversation, it's more about asking your software solution provider these questions about what do you have a native integration with Google Analytics, or how can I get my analytics data into the CRM? But if you're asking those questions, that's the great thing about technology is it handles it in the background, right? You just drop some scripts and you're in good shape, and then you can make amazing reports that give you tremendous insights into your marketing mix.
Yeah, there's an interesting conversation to be had when you talk about a attribution from content or attribution from a website, and the fact that many firms are looking at this lead it's web, it's digital, right? It came from our website. We know that because they filled out a form. But you really have to go a layer above that and understand what actually is the traffic channel. So you're really looking for two things, right? A phone call or a web form, both could have come from the same paid ad that you ran on Google Analytics. You need to be able to combine your mediums into one channel, because you really don't care about your return on a phone call. You care about your return on the spend that drove that phone call or drove that form.
No, exactly. I think that's a really good point about the mediums. I mean, I just thinking about Google alone, I can think of 3 different mediums on a search on a firm's name, right? You could have a paid ad, you could have a traditional organic listing, or you could have a GMB profile, a Google My Business profile listing. And you want to be able to segment each of those. And if you're just tracking web, those are all going to be bucketed the same way. You're not going to be able to distinguish between the paid ad, the organic, and your Google My Business listing.
Yeah, I would even argue that the channel itself is much more important than the medium, right? Whether it came through a chat or a form fill out or a phone call, that's just how the dots are being connected. It's the fact that the ad spend started in a certain place, or as you mentioned, Google My Business or organic search. Going down the list here, let's talk about social media.
Yes, I mean it's the same thing. Social is a social channel. It doesn't have, in my view of it, it doesn't have the same intent as search, right? I think that's an important point to make too, just from a marketing standpoint. One of the reasons that Google has been so successful with their ads is that they've monetized consumer intent. So the simple version is when you go do a search on Google, the consumer's looking for something, whether it's your name, your firm name, or a non-branded query like, personal injury lawyer in Chicago or something like that. Social, a little bit different, right? So people, I think more and more we're seeing referrals and recommendations happening on social, but traditionally social's still more of a brand awareness and engagement, a community building, an audience building exercise. But the point is that if you post something on Facebook, whether it's organic or a paid Facebook ad, same rules apply for attribution, in my opinion. You can still track people who click through from that Facebook post to your website. And then if you've got dynamic number insertion, it'll show Facebook as the channel or medium, depending on how you're building it. So you can actually see the phone calls that are generated both with a dedicated tracking number on Facebook. So you can have your Facebook business page. You can say, hey, this person called directly from Facebook, which I think is surprising for a lot of lawyers, that people actually call directly from a Facebook listing. And you can also track people that came back to your website from Facebook campaigns.
And that's done by not just posting the URL if you're going to be sharing a piece of content on social, right? You have to append these variables to the URL. We won't go too deep into it. We just want to describe a little bit about that.
Yeah, the buzzword here for folks that want to do more research on this is UTM parameters or campaign parameters. If you just search for like UTM parameters, you'll get all sorts of information. And I think Google puts a tool out that's a free tool that'll help you build campaign parameters. But essentially, it's just something you add to the end of your URL that tells your tracking system, whether it's Google Analytics, your CRM, source, medium, content's a common one. If you're doing Google Ads, you can get down to the granularity of the actual keywords that are generated. So it's some of these systems, Google Analytics, even without UTM parameters, will still track, channel, source, medium. But if you want to get down to the campaign level, you really want to be thinking about how to append those. And a lot of the CRM tools, they'll do it for you, so they'll automate some of that. But it's important that you understand how it works, because otherwise you can pretty easily break things.
So social media is definitely a part of your branding exercises. As a law firm, we talked to Ed Herman earlier in the week, Brown and Crouppen. He is one of the biggest personalities who've taken advantage of this whole attention economy, and his YouTube channel. It's great. If you haven't seen it, a couple days ago, check out that episode on Liticast. We shared a great conversation with Ed Herman. And I think we need to talk about how you attribute your branding efforts. And those could be done through a variety of different ways. It could be a billboard, or it could be something like what Ed is doing.
Yeah, and I think for me, brand gets a little bit. I watched the Ed Liticast. Amazing. Everybody should go watch that. So much to learn there. My big thing about the branding activity and tracking brand, first, I would say use Google Search Console. So Search Console is a free tool that will give you impression data, click data, and position data with the specific queries. So it used to be Google Analytics would show you the keywords that people landed on your site using. They took that away, but they still give it to you in Search Console. And so if you want just a very general way to track the impact of your brand activities, see if over time the impressions for searches on your name or your firm name, or if it's Ed Versus, like Ed Versus is a brand. And so I'm sure, and it'd be curious to get Ed's follow-up to see those searches in Search Console, right? Because when they see that, or when they think of Ed, they're going to, sometimes some people are going to go and do a search on his name, or they're going to do a search on the firm name, or going to search on the partner's name, or search on the brand name. And so tracking that growth in Search Console is a really good way to be able to understand if you're growing the number of people who are actually interested in your brand. You can do the same thing if you're running paid ads, right? If you bid on queries, bid on keywords that include your brand name, you can track that growth over time too. And so that's just a very simplistic way to do it. You can also, I think Ed mentioned this too, but anecdotally, when people are saying, hey, I watched your stuff on YouTube, and they're calling you to inquire about your services, that's pretty good. That's some loose attribution right there.
Yep. Today we talked a lot about direct attribution, but you're right. There is this influenced attribution that, it even more sophisticated than some of the things we're talking about today. Someone mentioning, how did you hear about us, when they're calling a phone number that you're attributing to a TV ad, but yet they're telling you that I found out about you from watching, Ed vs. Naps, which again, if you haven't watched Ed vs. Naps, go watch Ed vs. Naps. So, there are layers and layers to this, and we are just touching the surface. Definitely open to answering any other questions that come in through the audience. And if there are more detailed questions that you have, if you're watching this recording, please reach out to me, reach out to Gyi. We're happy to have these discussions. I mean, we have had these discussions with each other now 3 or 4 times over the past couple of weeks, and we get pretty detailed. So we love these conversations.
We love to geek out about this stuff. So, and I think and this is really kind of like, again, back to the original purpose, give folks a high level overview, at least communicate that this can be done, that you can actually measure these things, but you can go really, really deep. And there are issues, like there's all sorts of things about, choosing the right attribution model for your firm, talking about if you're doing TV and other offline, like talking about media mix modeling. But again, at the end of the day, it's all about building accountability to your marketing and advertising activities. The web and technology just make it a lot more effective than it used to be. But I think it's important also not to lose sight of, don't become so myopic about attribution that you just abandon brand building, right? I think that's a big mistake that a lot of folks make. And again, it's really just thinking about this like more holistically. What are the impacts of these integrated strategies working in harmony that are driving more people to your firm, and ultimately getting back to connecting that to retainers and fees?
And I think that's a good takeaway, right? What once was not possible is now possible. If you are spending marketing dollars, do not let anyone tell you that it can't be tracked, right? It can be tracked. It's just a matter of, do you want to put in the effort in order to get the data points that you need? Understand, I'm going to bring this full circle, understand your business. Understand what are the data points and the milestones that are important to your business. We know what they are for law firms. They're very similar for every plaintiff firm out there, at least. You want to know what those data points are and how many of them you're producing and where they are coming from. And with some of the tactics that we talked about today, you have the ability to do this today, right? Whether it's from online channels or offline channels, as long as you have a centralized place where you can house the combination of what's happening with the case or an intake or matter once it actually comes into your call center, with combining that with the marketing that started earlier in the funnel. And that really is the takeaway here. It's, you have to connect the marketing that drove that intake to what happens after that intake was created. And then you have this full cycle of reporting. You put together a great article. We'll share it in the recap about this very topic. I think it's a 2 or 3 page article. So we'll have to get that shared if anyone watching wants to read more in depth. Any other points that you think we missed that we should be touching on before we finish up here today?
No, I think this has been a pretty good overview. Again, I sound like a broken record here, but there is so much gold in your marketing data and CRM data, whether it's nurturing existing relationships or staying in touch with former clients or building custom audiences on Facebook. The firms that are they have a huge competitive advantage. If you're stuck 20 years ago on your marketing and advertising, the competitors who are taking advantage and implementing these systems and measuring this data, they just have a huge competitive advantage. And so I encourage you, if you plan to be around for the next 10, 20 years practicing, it's really time to take the next evolution of attribution for your marketing time and money.
Absolutely. Where can our guests reach you, Gyi?
You can go to AttorneySync.com. I waste a lot of time on Twitter too. So at Gyi Tsakalakis. If you just search, if you search my weird name, usually I'm the one that comes up or pretty close. So happy to field questions. Really loved being here today. So thanks so much. And thanks for everybody who tuned in.
Yep, absolutely. We will see everybody next week for another round of Liticast. We have guests from Esquire Bank who are going to be talking about valuing your case inventory, forecasting the value of your case inventory. That episode's coming up on Wednesday. We have a conversation with Whitney from Kaufman Law, who is going to be talking about adopting technology and how that could impact client experience. And great episodes that we have slated coming up through the rest of June and into July. So keep up to date on our calendar, litify.com/Liticast. You can catch all of our episodes on our website or on Facebook Live, on LinkedIn Live. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube and be notified. If you miss an episode, you can catch them on all those channels as well. So thank you again, Gyi, for joining us. Thank you for everybody watching at home. And we will see everybody next week.